Hi, I'm Seamless, and today I'm going to show you how to make this bass. Alright, so you see that I have it open in Harmor. However, this is the main meat of this bass is actually nothing to do with Harmor. Harmor actually just adds a little bit of extra sweetening at the end of things. I'll show you all about that as we discuss it. So this is what the bass actually sounded like before the harmonization. Which, as you can see, is not really a huge difference, but it's just enough to really make a difference. At least in my opinion. I like the harmored version as like a final version, but obviously what I made in the Vocoder chain wasn't that bad. So two things really matter here. The settings in the Vocoder are very particular with what I'm doing, but really what's happening is the carrier is an FM citrus patch that's a little crazy. It's a little weird, and it's a little bit different from how I normally do things. So before I talk about the Vocoder, let's talk about the carrier. Now, this might be kind of harsh and loud, so I kind of recommend that you turn it down at this point. Playing in 3, 2, 1. Wow. Okay, so what's going on here? A lot of stuff. And I'm taking advantage of a particular thing that Citrus can do that other FM synths are not quite. I mean, they don't do this. It's that down here we have FM selected by default. You got your FM matrix, but this button stands for ring modulation, and you have an entire separate matrix for ring modulation. Now it is a separate matrix in that you can set separate settings for M amounts, modulation amounts, but if I were to put 3 into 2, for example, and then mod 2, it's the mod for both FM and RM at the same time. So you can only really automate. I mean, you automate like the volumes of the ops, which cause the primary modulation amount to go up and down, which causes the modulation that we hear in the sound. And you can only turn up, one volume of one op. I mean, there's only one volume for each op, so that means that if you have FM and RM settings from the same operator, then both of them are going to be controlled by that operator's volume. Now, other cool things that I'm doing includes on the fundamental FM here, operator 2 into operator 1, I'm utilizing the weird like TX mode formats that you can do with FM. And if I were to go to op 6 where you can just see what the effects are supposed to do, you can turn on this one and it does this to the waveform, which is actually derived from an old school DX7 kind of wave, same as this and this sort of thing. You can even like do more than one at the same time, and it's real interesting. It does interesting things to the sound and the waveform. And in this case, I kind of liked what it did to the original waveform. Not only did I do that, but I also did a bit like you can see how the wave is curved here. And what that does, I go back to operator 6, is that I turn it into a triangle, which did that. Then I just nudged it just a tiny bit towards the saw wave territory, so it looks more like a saw than a triangle. And then I engaged a half. You see that there, and then I skewed it so that it's back at the center like that. So it's like a bent triangle, and that's what I did there for that. And it caused a difference in the sound. Now, what's going on here is that I wanted the high harmonic to be higher than 64. The 64 pitch, which is the maximum ratio that you can get. I could have been smart and I could have set everything to ratio 1, in which case 64 would have actually have been a lot more. It would have been more than double because it's exponential. But then if I wanted the 64, if I did ratio 1 for the primary, then it would have been 32. But since I didn't do that from the beginning, I decided not to mess with that. So what I did is I went to the OSC panel here and just turned off the fundamental like this and just brought it up to the first octave, which is the very next thing there. And now it's just twice as high. So then I could bring it down. I could also make it way much higher than it was originally. I'm also doing the thing where I modulate the secondary high harmonic. And I'm also modulating the modulation of the high harmonic with a octave higher waveform. And I did that because I wanted to smooth out the kind of modulation you get when that happens. But the thing is, it introduces a lot of weird artifacts. This is where the ring modulation comes in. Ring modulation is also known as amplitude modulation because ring modulation is the same thing as FM, only instead of modulating frequency and modulates amplitude, hence amplitude modulation. It's called ring modulation, not because you would think that it kind of makes it kind of a ringy sound, but because the original hardware circuitry that would make this effect was a ring, and so that's what would cause the amplitude modulation to go into effect. So ring modulation it is, or RM. Now, as you can just imagine for a second that, you know, because it's modulating it's modulating the frequency or the amplitude based on the shape of the waveform. That means that in at least in terms of things like this, it would be like it go off and then on again and off and then on again, or on and off again, on and off again. And because FM also does that, I realized that the RM equivalent could attenuate some interesting sounds, and it does. So watch what happens when I bring back the RM that I have engaged. It's very slight, but it takes out some kind of annoying sounds. I wasn't exactly targeting these sounds. I kind of just messed with it until I found something that made sense, and then I realized what it was doing. And now that I know this sort of thing, it'll be very interesting for things I make in the future. Now, the whole reason why I make this bass, I would not use this as a sound outside of a Vocoder carrier, but the reason why it works very well as a carrier is because not only does it have very slight vowel lead modulation in itself, it's just full. The spectrum is full. And I also have the operator 6 going out as a clean bass. It's just ridiculous. And what that means is that the modulator in the carrier, the modulator in the Vocoder will be more apparent on top of the carrier because there's just so much for it to work with. And so now let's talk about it being vocoded. So I'm going to bring carrier back into Vocoder. I'm going to remap everything correctly because it always unmaps it when you take away things that were there. And I muted it. So what am I using as a modulator? Well, I'm using a vocal patch from this is the beta, by the way. If you're a registered FL user, you will see these things in the forum. It's actually already an older version, but this is FL 10.10, which is a beta for FL 11, and in the cool stuff folder, actually I'm going to show this off. In the cool stuff folder, you'll see my tracks. That's so cool. But also there's a whole bunch of other stuff. And if you go into music, miscellaneous music used by demo projects, there's a bunch of stuff. And I used a vocal from a track. I already forget what it's from. It'll tell me here. This one, return to, boink, lead vocal. And then I time stretched it, and that's because I wanted to vocal events. Like if you listen to my look at the waveform up here, listen to how I'm saying things. Like whenever I make sibilant sounds, you know, things are happening, and then I make, you know, the vowel-y movements with my mouth, which is how speech is a thing that happens in life. But it's very fast, and singing is a bit more controlled, obviously, but it's still fast. And so I stretched it so that I could control when these vocal events happen. And so let's listen to what the modulator sounds like now in the Vocoder.
Push it, see what's our own way. Push it.
Yeah, that sounds hilarious. Let's put that back into Vocoder. So I made decisions on what I put where, not on the sounds that I heard, but on how it sounded with the Vocoder. So don't worry about trying to like glean how things are going to sound just from that. Although I have to assume if you do this enough, eventually you would be able to do that. But I would do things like play it and then like move it around until I found something else. Until I eventually found the thing that I ended up using. And I'm playing the harmony thing on top. Yeah. So let's talk about the Vocoder now. Vocoder. Alright, so I did some things differently in Vocoder than I typically do when I make a vocoder type bass. And one of the things that I did is that I actually made the bass lean, the processing, I made it lean more towards the carrier sound, which is with this modulator bandwidth multiplier knob here. this direction is more towards the modulator, this direction is more towards the carrier. Look at what happens when I mess with it. And such. The pitch is typically, I mean, it's low, as usually what you do. It's just there to my taste. I mean, obviously all of this is there to my taste, but this would be a good starting point for you should you desire to use this for a thing. Now, this doesn't really have that kind of speak and spell characteristic when you think of like that kind of robot-y sound, but that sound comes from having a particular type of bandwidth setting. I'm using the default number of bands, but like watch. You see how the bands are they're not full. You see how if I go too far, you get that kind of glassy sort of sound that, I mean, I personally don't like, but you could probably find a way to make that work. And that has to do with this filter fatness setting. And I mean, as you can tell from me messing with these parameters, the setup that I have currently is very touchy. Like it sounds the way it sounds when I use it in the Harmor. Only if I do this. If I move it anywhere, that glassy sound starts to come back, and the modulation doesn't quite work the way that it did a minute ago. That's important to remember. I didn't do a whole lot in the drop-down menu things here. I did a bit with the bandwidth, just very slight movements, and then I actually pitched up some things in the modular pitch shift window. Now let's talk about what I did in Harmor. So recorded it out into Edison, the whole thing, because actually what we're doing is very light. It's a very light kind of resampling. I did engage a bit of unison here, but then I turned it off almost immediately. Let's engage the back. Shut up. And that's just so that I could get that kind of the movement engaged so that the sound is different. It's a new kind of sound. I don't have a chorus engaged. Well, okay, I have compression engaged, but I had chorus engaged. I don't really like typical chorus plugins just because you don't really have as much control over the sound as I like. But really what I did here is I messed with the formants. Now, if you engage the formants by turning up the formant mix and then don't move this knob, you can go into the image formant mutation window, which is in this third column, which I'm pretty sure you can see now because I set XSplit to show layered windows, which I believe is what this is. And then you can mess with the formants. And I did very little, but what I did, I believe, had a pretty decent impact. Yeah. Now I also move around the sharpness knob because if I have any kind of unison engaged, sometimes this happens. And then it didn't happen because I fixed it already with the unison problem. But usually when you have unison engaged with any kind of sound and you're resampling, there's this kind of weird like watery lo-fi sound that you're getting, which isn't actually lo-fi, but it's the result of high frequency phase cancellation. And you can attenuate that by moving around the sharpness knob. And that's just where I had it. Anyway, like I said before, I said to Erin, you can make it sound lower if you want to. However, I really didn't want to go that deep just for this particular test. I mean, I could find a use for that, and I'm pretty sure people can. The rest of you guys can as well. All right. I believe I covered everything of import. In the freaking modulator channel, I have a compressor running. Just so that all parts of the vocal sounds are at volume so that they appropriately trigger the bands in the Vocodex. That's basically all the whole reason I did that. And then you'll end up with the sound once you use Harmor. Now, as far as this automation goes, I set it up in a way that kind of went with what the vocal events were doing. I mean, there's a little bit of give and pull. Like I can put a thing here and then find something else, and then it'll still work. Or then I'll make it move and work around. But like, if I were to use this in a track, I probably wouldn't use this as the actual phrase. Like most of the resampling stuff I would do, I'd probably cut it up and then like use the bits and pieces to make more rhythmic sense in the track. That's a whole like writing composition thing, and I might talk about that in the future, but that's not necessary at the moment. So if you have any questions, let me know. I'll try to answer them to the best of my ability. I'll put up presets of this stuff. I'll put up the carrier and all these effects inserts so that you guys can mess with that. The carrier, I think, is honestly the most complicated part of this whole thing because it does a bunch of stuff I don't normally do with Citrus, but it worked out to the advantage of the universe. All right. Have a nice day.